Coming up, it's an interview you don't want to miss. We're talking The Voice with Hawaiian singer Kamalei Kawa'a, who's turning heads this season. And the Bureau of Indian Affairs is turning 200 this year. We dive into his history on this week's IndigiPolitics. That's next on the ICT Newscast.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.
Support for the ICT Newscast with Aaliyah Chavez comes from the Arizona PBS studios in Phoenix at the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communications at Arizona State University.
Amirawa Hopa. Thank you for joining us. I am Aaliyah Chavez. Our next guest has a name you'll want to remember. Kamalei Kawa'a is a native Hawaiian singer who has earned a spot competing on season 25 of NBC's The Voice. I spoke with him recently about this life-changing experience and about what it means to represent his people. Take a look. Kamalei Kawa'a, thank you so much for joining us on the ICT Newscast.
Thank you for having me. Aloha.
You are a contestant on season 25 of NBC's The Voice. How did your journey start?
My journey started with my wife, actually. My wife signed me up for the virtual auditions, actually without me knowing. So, it was kind of a surprise to me. But she signed me up for it. She encouraged me to do it and to try it because it was really something that I was a little too shy, a little too nervous to do. So she pushed me to do it, and here we are today, sitting here in this interview, and so many great things has happened since that moment.
You first caught the attention of the judges at your blind audition when you sang Bob Marley's Redemption song. Take us through that song decision.
With the song, especially for my blind audition that I was able to do, redemption song. There's a lot of messages in that song, right? That can be taken a lot of different ways. But the only message that I wanted to portray and I wanted to make sure that was clear when I was singing the song was that on behalf of all people who has ever gone through any type of struggles, specifically for Native people, and we know the struggles that we've been through. That the key to that, to moving forward from that and from all of that trauma and from anything you've been through, is the lyrics of the song, yeah, to emancipate yourself from that mental slavery. And once we do that, we can move forward. Once we do that, we can continue to build ourselves up as Native people. In whatever part of the country that you're in, or whatever part of this world that you're in, that we have a place here, and that we're going to continue to be noticed and be here. Especially in our homelands.
I loved that you used your big moment to uplift Native people. Were you surprised by the reaction of the judges?
I would say that I was a little surprised by their reaction for sure, but it wasn't something foreign to me. Coming from Hawaii, as a Native Hawaiian myself, being surrounded by other Native Hawaiians, proud Native Hawaiians, it wasn't something foreign to me, but it definitely was something surprising to get a reaction from other people in that way.
Speaking about folks back home, what has been the reaction of those in your community?
There's been a ton of good, positive comments, a lot of love, a lot of pride, coming from our community, especially being able to represent them. I had this conversation with my mom the other day that people from our community feel like they're a part of this journey too. They feel like this is also their journey as well, and that really is what makes this whole thing special, is being able to represent, right, all Native people, right, but also bring them on this journey of positivity, and share that positivity and love with the world.
Kamalei, as your journey on The Voice continues, is there a particular moment that you really want to share with the world?
I feel like that moment happened already during the battle rounds when we were able to sing Israel Kamakaviva Ole's version of somewhere over the rainbow. And not a lot of people know it, but if you're from Hawaii, you know that track and that man Israel is the soundtrack of Hawaii, and it that was a highlight moment for me, to be able to sing that song on this platform, and everyone from Hawaii instantly knowing what version it was from, whose version it really was. And a lot of people from Hawaii don't know the original version. A lot of us grew up listening to Israel's version, so that was definitely a moment, and a highlight for me throughout this experience.
Be sure to tune in later in the show for part 2 of my conversation with Kamalei Kawa'a. We'll talk all about perpetuating Hawaiian culture, from language to the biggest hula festival in the world. We'll be right back. This week on IndigiPolitics, we learn more about the Bureau of Indian Affairs. On March 11th, the BIA reached its 200th year. Here with that conversation is ICT political correspondent Polly Dinette-Claw and regular contributor John Tasuda, who is a principal at Navigators Global.
Welcome back to the newscast, John.
Thanks for having me again.
So earlier this month, in March, the Bureau of Indian Affairs turned 200 years old. Can you talk a little bit about the history of the Bureau?
Yes, it's one of the most unique federal agencies, actually, not just because it deals with Indian tribes, but its own history is very unique. Most folks don't know, but the agency originally started out as as part of the Department of War, which is the predecessor to the now Department of Defense. And when this was established in 1824, there weren't actually a lot of federal agencies. So there was no place else to put it. And at the time, the major interactions between tribes and the United States was through the Department of War. Not always because of conflict, but because the Department of War was responsible for fulfilling the requirements that the United States had in most of the treaties at the time, which prohibited most non-Indian people from entering into Indian country or the Indian territory at the time. So the Department of War was responsible for those interactions. They licensed people. They needed an agency to take care of those sort of administrative tasks. So they set up the Bureau of Indian Affairs.
And John, can you tell us a little bit about the purpose of the Bureau of Indian Affairs and what it is tasked with in the Department of the Interior?
Certainly. So again, very unique history. The department, or so the agency really started out in assisting the Department of War, and then in 1849, when the Department of Interior was created, it moved from this agency within the Department of War into the new civilian agency, the Department of Interior. But its tasks didn't really change at that point. Primarily, they engaged in sort of the day-to-day activities that the United States needed with the tribes, particularly those in which it had treaty relationships. And at the time, that included things like delivering treaty rations, et cetera. Sometimes the United States was supposed to deliver like farm equipment. And then it also oversaw the beginnings of things like education for Indian children by bringing in usually church missionary groups to start education schools, et cetera, for Indian children. And so that was sort of where it began. But of course, as we know over time, it has morphed into this agency that provides a lot of sort of on the ground, if you might think of them as municipal government services. And that really occurred in sort of what we call the late reservation period, late in the 1800s, right before the turn of the 20th century and right before allotment. The Bureau of Indian Affairs sort of mushroomed into this agency because the United States was on a path to try to civilize Indians and get them used to what people thought of as sort of regular civilized life. Living in communities, having municipal services, the things that most Americans were really starting to get used to at the time. And so the BIA filled in that role on most reservations. And again, that led to this mushrooming of this agency in its administrative tasks. So they provided not just big things like schools and even hospitals at the time, but everything down to setting up bank accounts at local banks outside of the reservation for Indian people to use, et cetera. And really, its sort of informal goal was to educate Indians on how to be civilized. And so it took on all these tasks.
And as we're looking ahead to the next 100 years of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, what should be the focus, or what should be the direction, the needle that the Bureau should head towards?
That's a really great question. And part of that depends on the vision that tribal leadership have. We've been on this path now for several decades of what we call self-governance, self-determination. And in that role, which a number of tribes have sort of tried to exercise as much as they can to the max, the BIA has really sort of a background role. The tribes provide all the things that the Bureau of Indian Affairs used to provide, and really the BIA is sort of in some ways a funding funnel to them, while it does still retain that trust responsibility to make sure that the services that it's funding through the tribe are actually provided. But it really sort of serves in this background role. However, there are other tribes that feel like the United States needs to continue to fulfill its treaty responsibilities directly. And we call those direct service tribes. And so the BIA has this direct responsibility to provide the kinds of services that other tribes do for themselves. So childcare services, all these things that other tribes provide, they do it as well. And so that's actually something I think that Indian country leadership should think about seriously for the next 100 years. Is one vision better than the other? Do we still need to have both? And where that line sort of falls in between those two. And these days, as we know, the original responsibilities that the BI had, which spread all, sort of the full spectrum of government services, are now have been divvied up. And some are at the Indian Health Service, which is within HHS. Some are at the Department of Education, and some are at HUD for Housing and Urban Development. And so those agencies as well often have similar programs like self-governance, and the same question really needs to be asked by tribal leadership. What model do we want to follow? The self-governance model, or we want the United States to still remain providing these direct services? So that's a big question.
And what are some of the ways that in, the immediate 5-10 years that the Bureau could do to improve the services that it does provide? I've heard a lot of talk from tribal leaders about the grant process. And so I'm curious what you've also heard as well.
So I think that there is improvements that can be made in the grant process. I think they've come a long ways, and they've tried to standardize it. It used to be that there were substantial differences between the way funding for self-determination or self-governance contracts came through versus those for the direct service tribes and tribes that got grants that ran alongside direct services. That's been standardized to a large degree, but there's still improvements that can be made there. The biggest thing probably for tribes is the timing of funding. Sometimes the federal government's timing of funding does not match up with the tribes' needs and how their budget cycles run or how they run their programs. And so that's always a place for improvement, I think. But I would say I would give a plug. One thing that is critically important to the future of the BIA and how the United States is going to meet its trust responsibilities to tribes is the BIA workforce. The success of self-governance over decades has pulled a lot of the professional workforce out of the BIA and into tribal employment, which is great and was intended. But at the same time, it's left the BIA much depleted with experienced and professional folks to deliver those services. And so it really is struggling, and has been for a long time, with developing a workforce to continue to provide the direct services that it needs, as well as the professional services needed for grant programs, self-determination programs. And so that's really a great need. It's something that the Bureau needs to really take leadership of itself, but the tribe should really think about how they can encourage that as well, because it benefits not just the BIA, but it benefits the tribes, particularly if we can continue to have a very vibrant uh, Native workforce in the BIA. That's part of what has made the changeover in the BIA in the last few decades so successful, is the big expansion of the Native employment population within the BIA employment.
Well, John, that's all the time that we have. Thank you once again for joining the newscast and sharing
Thank
with
you.
us a little bit about the BIA.
Thank you. Always enjoy it.
Visiting with family and relatives will help us from feeling lonely or socially isolated. COVID-19 changed everything, like our ancestors who survived war, famine, and epidemics. Our elders had to make sacrifices too. The more we are socially connected with our family and community, the less health problems we will have and the longer we will live. We need to stay active to keep our spirits alive. Remember, you are not alone. Connected together, we will stand strong. For more information on elder isolation or caregiver resources, go to connectedindigenousElders.org.
Revitalizing language is a priority for many tribes across Turtle Island. That's because language is what ties them to their sense of place and identity. Almost 10 million people identify as American Indian or Alaska Native, but only 250,000 speak their indigenous language. ICT wants to do its part in perpetuating the beauty of these native languages. That's why we've added a regular feature to the newscast. Today we head to New York, to the Seneca Nation, where Stuart Huntington caught up with Janos Bowen, who is working to restore the Seneca language.
Janos Nikyason, Anondawaga ni Agiganga Haikwa. Tikanonge Haweni Ohio, Guas, Knoits Nona Ogwenio, Kajetakwa ni Onondawaga Gawano. So my name is Janos. I am a member of the Seneca Nation and Beaver Clan. I live on the Allegheny territory of the Seneca Nation, and I really like it when I'm able to use our language.
Why is it important to bring back your beautiful language?
One of my elders constantly pulls out the dictionary, believe it or not, the English dictionary, and looks up nation. And he says, what does it say in the definition? What do we have to have? And it says a shared language. So in my mind, thanks to my elder, if we truly want to be sovereign, we need to have our own language. We can't lose that. That is really part of who we are. And it's a strong statement if we can still use our language that we are sovereign people. We have our own language. We have our own way of thinking. So as a spiritual person from the Cold Spring Longhouse, I also believe it just has a different depth, our language. When we do our ceremonies, it just, the things, the words that we have in our language, the concepts are just so different sometimes than those of English, that I really feel like even our ceremonies would really lose out in terms of this really deep, powerful meaning if we had to do them in English. So our people actually do say, like, if we have to do them in English, then we need to stop our own ceremonies, because they need to be done in our own languages. And they're very strict about that. So even to this day, all of our ceremonies are only done in our language. People might talk between portions of it to their neighbor in English, but the ceremony itself will be carried out in Seneca. That's a very deep, I guess, a spiritual thing to really understand and know your language, as well as expressing sovereignty for yourself and your people. And the neat thing about working at the Seneca Nation is they have sincerely put forth funds to create various language efforts within their government. So we have an immersion department. We have my department, the Allegheny Language Department. We have a Faith Keeper School, which is a Montessori Seneca language nest. We have language programming within our early childhood centers. We have a ceremonial program. We have a Cattaraugus Territory Language Department. And we have an immersion language nest on the Cattaraugus Territory as well. So there are many, many things here on the Seneca Nation territory that are working toward revitalization or restoration efforts. Some of our elders prefer restoration, so I will try to use that.
Bowen talked about her mother's reaction to hearing more Seneca language users.
When she came and she saw all these people, and she saw young people who could do certain things, she cried because she never thought she would see that. So there are definitely good things happening. It's encouraging. I try not to think about how much work we have left because it can be overwhelming. When you see those people just feel empowered and happy to be able to manipulate the language or just use it with ease, it's just an amazing thing to see. Even if you aren't the teacher, even if you're just the administrative supporter, it's still a joy to see.
Up judge. Up judge. I'll see you again. Up means again. Up judge is I'll see you again, because there is no such thing as goodbye in the Passamaquoddy language.
Earlier, we brought you a conversation with the Hawaiian singer Kamalei Kawa'a, who has wowed the judges on NBC's The Voice. In the second part of our interview, we spoke about language, family, hula, and community. You speak the Hawaiian language fluently, and we've heard you speak a little bit in the episode so far. Why is that important to you?
It's important to me to perpetuate Hawaiian language because in all native peoples, sense, in a native sense, or in an indigenous sense, language is the beginning of it all. Without our language, we wouldn't be a people. And I think that the language is the most important thing. It's the way that we communicate with each other. It's the oldest way, of us to feel our ancestors, to feel our kupuna, is through speaking the same language and the same words that they uttered too. So
Merry Monarch is coming up very soon. Tell our viewers about the festival.
yeah, so the Merry Monarch Festival is a hula competition that features the best hula schools and hula people from all around the world, and throughout Hawaii. And besides the competition part, it's a way for us to put hula, which is the way that we tell stories in Hawaii, the way that our stories, our place names, a lot of things are passed down through these chants and through these dances. It's a way for us to put that and magnify it on this huge stage. And what we call it the Olympics of hula. And it's where the best of the best come. We compete, but even more so than competing, it's a way for us to continue to make sure that art of dancing, that art of chanting and telling stories lives on through the test of time.
In your blind audition on The Voice, we saw short snippets of your mom and your wife. Tell us a little bit about your childhood.
So growing up, I say it all the time. I say that I was born into hula, and it's something that came automatic to me. And because my mom is a kumuhula, she's a master hula teacher. My siblings and I grew up in and around hula our whole lives. I really started dancing at the age of 8 with the hula school that I'm with now. But growing up, it was an automatic, and I'm really glad that I was born in the setting that I was born in, because it pushed me to really be a part of my culture. And in Hawaii, you think that a lot of people have that access to culture and that access to cultural things, but we really don't here. It's actually pretty hard to come across people who speak Hawaiian, who dance hula, who practice their culture. But I was one of the lucky ones who was born into it, and I don't take that for granted. Um, and I make sure that it's a point that I have a daughter now, that she is also surrounded by that hopefully one day she'll fall in love with it the same way that we did.
That is really beautiful. In the show, you've highlighted how proud you are to come from the island of Maui, which of course has been in the news because of the deadly wildfires. What is something that you really wish was highlighted about the recovery efforts?
I think one of the things that needs to be highlighted, other than all of the hurt, right, and all of the trauma and all of the the anguish, right, that has happened, through all of that, one of the greatest things that I've seen through our community and throughout Hawaii is number one, love, hope, you know, and community. You know, those three things were three positive things that came out of such a crazy disaster. You know, but through that, our people were able to show those three things. You know, love to each other. You know, hope that we're gonna get through this and recover, and community. The whole community coming together, pretty much shutting down our whole island for the time being. You know, and putting their full support in supporting everyone who was affected by that fires.
Well, Kamalei, the best of luck to you, and thank you so much for joining us on the ICT Newscast.
Thank you so much, Mahalo. Thank you for having me.
You can catch part 1 and 2 of my conversation with Kamalei at ictnews.org under the Newscast tab.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.